you an Aussie plant lover looking to plant a hedge? In this video, I'm going to have a chat about some of the most important factors that you need to consider when you're choosing the right plant, how far apart to space your hedges. I'm going to briefly discuss how to prune your hedges and avoid bare patches, or maybe even fix bare patches if they're already there. And then I'm going to spend most of this video going over some of the best Aussie native hedges that have ever been bred in this country and give some pros and cons for each of them. So in terms of choosing the right plant for your garden, have a think about factors such as the climate, soil conditions, how much maintenance you're willing to put in. What are your goals for this plant? Like, is it a screening plant, or are you just looking to build some habitat for birds and maybe some pollinator food as well? Are you trying to define borders, or maybe even trying to guide the eye along a pathway, or trying to highlight a particular plant in your garden? These are all factors that you're going to want to consider. How far apart you plant your hedges is really going to depend on the plants and also your goals. So are you really concerned about budget? Are you really concerned about how long it's going to take for these hedges to fill in? It also really depends on the plants that you're choosing, because all different plants have different growth habits. If you're planting something like a slim callistemon that has about a 1.3 meter maximum width once it's fully grown, you wouldn't really plant them 1.3 meters apart, because there's going to be 1.3 meters between the two plants, with half of that going to be on either side of either plant that are next to each other. And then eventually they're really only just going to be touching. So you get some screening, but you're not going to get that really dense hedge that you're looking for. So I'd probably plant them about 80 centimeters to a meter apart, and then let them really grow through each other and really thicken up. Now, as those plants are growing on either side and they're still young, there's going to be some gaps in between. So what you can actually do, and this is a little bit of a hack in the landscaping game, is to plant one in between them. And then once those branches are all starting to touch, you can thin out every second plant so that you don't really have that big gap in between them the whole time. As always, when we're planting, we want to plant as deep as the root ball and then twice as wide for each hole. That's going to prevent the plant sinking down beneath the soil surface and then mulch or soil getting piled up around that stem, which is really what we don't want. Pruning. Now, I'm a mechanical hedger kind of guy, so I love like your petrol hedge trimmers or your electric hedge trimmers. I know that some people really love the shears. That's fine, completely up to you. Now, I like to get my mechanical hedge trimmer and then I like to go underneath the foliage a little bit and then turn it and bring it up like that. And that's going to get rid of most of those stems at the bottom and prevent a little bit of a skirt around the bottom. That's one of the biggest mistakes when hedging, is I notice that a lot of people leave those stems at the bottom and it looks like a little skirt. Now, I've had bosses tell me to actually dig the nose of the hedge trimmer into the ground and to prevent those skirts from happening. That's fine, you can do that, but one of the downsides of that happening is that it is going to blunten the blades and you'll also get dirt and sand in between them, and it can just be a little bit scratchy and not great. I like to start at the bottom and work my way up, and then also try to focus on the big picture. Don't get lost in the details. Have a go, just keep going in the same motion, pretend like your arms are on a pivot like that, and then walk away and have a look at it from far away, because the way it looks when you're looking at it from far away actually looks completely different than when you're up close to it. If you're up close and you sort of try and get rid of this little bit and that little bit, when you walk away you'll probably notice that there's some little dents in it and it doesn't look completely straight, as if you treated your arm like it was on a pivot. Some people like to use a string line and get it really, really tight so that you have a perfectly straight line and then use that as a guide. That's great. I personally don't have time for that, so I just use my eyes and I have a look at it. And with practice, you get pretty good at it, and you don't really need to be too perfect as long as it looks good to your eye. Avoid trying to get too high with a mechanical hedge trimmer just with your hands. There are actually extension hedge trimmers that you can use that will actually bend. Now, a lot of the time, unfortunately, we have growth on hedges that's really out on the very outer tips, and that's due to just consistently hedging, and then no sunlight ever gets into the inner branches. And then when you accidentally shave a little bit further, you've suddenly got all these bare patches, and that doesn't look great. Now, really, probably what you're going to have to do is be patient for that to grow back. If it's only a small amount, what you can do is you can tie some of those other branches in, and then you can try and mask it, but that's not going to work for bigger patches. Technically, for a truly healthy hedge, we actually do want some growth on the back of those branches, and so really what we want to be doing is, if you can, prune some of those branches back and let some of that sunlight in. I know that you can leave bare patches and it doesn't look great to start with, but you can start to encourage some of that growth from the inside of the hedge. So that's what we really want to do. Try and do this before spring, before the growing season, because if you do it after the growing season, it's going to take forever to grow back. Signs of a struggling hedge and how to fix it. So if you've got some sparse foliage, discolored leaves, stunted growth, there's something going wrong with your hedge. So let's have a look into what might be happening. For starters, you might have unequal resources going towards the hedge. So maybe there might be part of the house is shading part of the hedge. And so the part that's in part of the shade for most of the day is growing less than the part that's in the full sun. Maybe the soil conditions are different. Maybe that water's running right off the top and going down into the bottom of a hill, and that's where all the water's pooling, and so that part of the hedge grows more quickly. And maybe the same thing's happening with the fertilizer as well. Do you have pests or diseases taking hold? That's something you can look at as well. And then have a look at the leaves and stems for any signs of pests or diseases, and then have a think about how you can remedy those. Is it a case of just spraying with some white oil, or maybe it's time to rip it out and put something more resilient in that space? Maybe you've got stem girdling, or maybe it's planted too deeply. A lot of the time we leave those stem ties on, and then what happens is above that tie is that the growth starts to get stunted and even starts to die back. So if there's part of a plant, like a particular branch, or even maybe the stem past a certain point, have a look to where that die back starts, and then see if there's a tie there, or maybe some damage from a whippersnipper or something like that. If that's the case, sometimes you're better off just pruning it out, or if you can remove the tie, sometimes it can come back, but there may be a weak spot there, and that plant may fail at that point during some wind, or if you brush against it, or just over time it might fall down. In terms of the best Aussie native plants for hedges, westringia is probably the best all-rounder. It's probably the closest thing that we have to that English box hedge, and it's going to respond really well to pruning, and they have that really great branching habit. Most of them don't grow that big though, that's the only downside. Callistemons and grevilleas probably have the most impressive flowers, and they also have a really good branching habit. Probably not quite as good as westringias, but still really good for hedges. And as good as westringias are for attracting birds and pollinators, grevilleas and callistemons probably are arguably even a little bit better, just because they tend to be a little bit more prolific in their flowering. I personally reckon that lily, pillies and ficus have the best foliage, so they're really good options as well. Melaleucas, saltbush, correas, acacias, these are all great hedging plants as well, and they're all Aussie natives. On top of these shrubs, or probably beneath them, we've also got a range of ground covers that respond really well to hedging as well, but we're not going to go into those in this video. Let's start out with westringias. Blue gem westringia is probably the most vivid flowering westringia we've ever come across. It produces amazing blush purple flowers, bushy growth that responds very well to pruning, and it grows up to about 1.5 meters. Aussie box westringia is another great native alternative to exotic box plants. It requires less pruning than other westringias, it's drought tolerant, and it needs a lot less water than English box plants as well. This one only grows up to about 60 centimeters. Grey box westringia is probably one of our most popular plants of all time, and it's constantly out of stock. So if you're running a wholesale or retail nursery business, pay attention. Back when Green Life Industry was called the NGIA, it was Plant of the Year in 2015. It's extremely compact, only grows up to 45 centimeters, and does great in a range of conditions. Straight and narrow syzygium. This psyllid resistant lily pilly is naturally very narrow. It's great as a screen or hedge for tight planting areas such as in courtyards or even on balconies if you prune it down. If you let it reach its maximum height, it's going to grow up to 8 meters high by only 1.5 meters wide, but you can prune it down to 2 meters if you really want to. Sublime acmena. This is another lush lily pilly, which has lime green new growth. It's also extremely myrtle rust resistant, so if you've noticed myrtle rust in your neighborhood, don't risk it and maybe go with this option. It'll grow to 5 meters high if you leave it unpruned. Sweeper waterhousia floribunda. This is a monster lily pilly, growing to 10 meters if you let it. It's an improved waterhousia variety with heavily weeping leaves and a much denser form. It's also highly myrtle rust resistant and is great as a large dense screening plant, as a street tree, or in planting near hardscapes because it can really soften that concrete. Now let's go over some bottle brushes. Slim callistemon has a narrow growth habit and really flowers its head off. It's another great screening plant, flowers its head off, and also has that narrow growth habit that we're looking for in courtyards. It's one of the best bioswale plants because it does really well with wet feet and also in droughts. It'll grow up to 3 meters if you let it. This is a Better John bred from Little John. It's easy to grow, quicker to establish, and in our opinion, it also has a better foliage colour. It stays at a compact height no higher than about 1.2 meters. Green John callistemon. This bottle brush has light green new growth and it's a great contrast to Better John in mixed plantings. It's also denser and faster growing than Little John, and it's also extremely myrtle rust resistant. And we simply can't mention bottle brushes without discussing our brand new burst callistemon series, which all grow between 1 to 1.5 meters high. Sweet burst callistemon has pretty baby pink flowers, and icy burst callistemon has white flowers, as well as a more upright branching habit that responds really well to pruning. In fact, it's one of our head breeder Todd's favourite hedge callistemons. Crimson Villia grevillea. This is quite literally one of the showiest winter flowering plants in the entire world. It's a tough, compact grevillea with tidier foliage than most types, and it grows well in dry and irrigated areas to a maximum height of around 80 centimeters. Bell's correa. This correa cultivar has vibrant orange-red flowers in winter to early spring, and is excellent in small gardens, patios, or as a lower ground covering layer beneath your taller hedges. This one will only grow to about 25 centimeters. Coastal pink correa. If you're looking for a little bit more height out of your correa, try this one, because it'll get up to about 2 meters. Coastal pink correa is a pink flowered form of the popular coastal correa alba. It's perfect for screening in coastal gardens because it can withstand some of that wind and salty spray that a lot of other plants can really struggle with. We've covered a lot of ground in this video, and there's really no shame in going back and having a look at some of the other sections. You can also read the description down below where you'll find links to see all of these plants and also find places to buy them from wholesalers and retailers.